They're the most mysterious, fascinating, and misunderstood creatures ever to walk the Earth. Now, get the real facts on these Jurassic giants in The Dinosaurs. The astounding 4-part PBS series is now available on home video from Turner Home Entertainment.
We have gained, finally, the first complete picture of what an early dinosaur looked like.
Follow some of the world's foremost paleontologists as they unravel the mysteries of these remarkable animals, from the mammal-like Myosaurus to the terrifying Tyrannosaurus Rex. When were the first fossils discovered? Where did they come from? And what caused the sudden demise of these giants?
I knew that if we were going to tell the story of the origin of dinosaurs, we had to come here.
There was a little more to evolution than Darwin realized.
In geological terms, their extinction was instantaneous.
The Dinosaurs takes you on a dazzling journey through the ages, featuring life-sized models, exciting animation, dynamic location footage, and such noted dinosaur experts as Dr. John Ostrom, the real-life inspiration for the main character in Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. Epic, eye-catching animation and models, says the Philadelphia Inquirer. And the Los Angeles Times says, a compelling picture of what is known right now, with animation that may provide the first correct picture of how dinosaurs really behaved. The Dinosaurs includes the most complete and up-to-date information that modern science can provide in The Monsters Emerge, Flesh on the Bones, The Nature of the Beast, and Death of the Dinosaur. The Dinosaurs is educational entertainment for the entire family. Get to know the awesome beasts who ruled the Earth for millions of years, only to disappear in the blink of an eye. The Dinosaurs is now available wherever video is sold from Turner Home Entertainment.
The following presentation is from PBS Home Video.
This is PBS.
Dinosaurs. Earth shakers and plunderers. Killing machines. The original experts in martial arts. For 160 million years, they were masters of the planet. And then, in a flash of geologic time, they died out. Vanished. Forgotten. A buried menagerie of skeleton beasts, lying in wait just below the skin of the Earth. This is the story of how dinosaurs came back to life, and of the men and women who have devoted themselves to reviving them. Amateur bone hunters, professional paleontologists, artists. It has meant grueling work in the broiling sun, high adventure, much hands-on labor, and more than a little luck.
Bone! We have bone, yes!
With the pieces of the puzzle being stitched together by means of meticulous laboratory science. It's the story of dedicated fossil finders who spend long days chipping away dirt inch by gravelly inch so that the monster can finally be raised from its rocky tomb. And there still remains a shroud over the greatest mystery of all. Why have all the dinosaurs vanished?
The Dinosaurs is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the financial support of viewers like you.
The story of dinosaurs in modern times begins in the 18th century in Holland, the city of Maastricht. Once, 70 million years ago, this was the bottom of a sea, a warm sea, and here limestone was formed. For centuries, the people of Maastricht quarried this limestone for buildings, burrowing into the rocks to create a vast warren of caves. It was the year 1770. Quarrymen, working 500 yards from the entrance of one of the caves, unearthed something that made the rest of the crew lay down their tools and gather around in amazement.
Hey, you.
Over the years, they'd often dug up chips of bone, fragments of skeletons, but never anything so mysterious. They knew someone who would pay good money for their discovery, a retired military surgeon called Dr. Hoffman. Dr. Hoffman was one of the first in a long line of professional and amateur scientists and bone hunters who have been fascinated by these secrets that the Earth yields up so grudgingly. Hoffman hurried over to the quarry and was shown something he had never seen before. It appeared to be an enormous jawbone. He bought it immediately. "25 years later, the jaw of the monster attracted the attention of the French Revolutionary Army, who occupied Maastricht in 1795. They claimed the jawbone for France, where to this day it reposes in the National Museum of Natural History in Paris. Soon after the French Revolution, the National Museum was the scene of another revolution. This one led by a celebrated professional scientist, Georges Cuvier.
Cuvier was professor of comparative anatomy, which was a booming branch of science at that time. And it was the very best place in the world for him to be, because I think the museum there probably had a larger collection than anywhere else in the world of skeletons and skins and, to some extent, pickled guts and so on, of a whole range of living species from all around the world. Like the other professors, he lived on the job. He had a house which went with the job, which was in the same grounds as the museum and the botanic gardens. And the botanic gardens included, as it still does, a small zoo. So he had access to at least a small collection of living animals, which he could study and see how they moved, how they put their anatomy to good use. So he was in a very good position to understand the relation between bones and muscles and sense organs and gut and everything else within a living creature, and see how all those parts of the body contributed to a whole way of life.
Cuvier had a theory. Huge bones had been found beneath the streets of Paris. They looked like elephant bones, except that they belonged to a creature that was clearly a different species, now called a mastodon. Cuvier reasoned that these bones belonged to an animal that had become extinct.
And it was really the first time that there was a really good, pretty strong case for extinction.
Then one day, Cuvier turned his attention to the huge jawbone, the trophy from Maastricht.
And he compared it with living reptiles and concluded this time that it was an enormous marine lizard.
Cuvier had opened the door to a past buried far deeper than anyone had imagined. And the search he began has continued to this day. Marine lizards like the monster from Maastricht, now identified as a mosasaur, populated the seas during the millions of years when dinosaurs reigned supreme on land. These sea creatures are what lured paleontologist Christopher McGowan here to Williston Lake in the Canadian Rocky Mountains.
Well, 30 years ago, we'd have been walking along here, but there was a dam put in on this Peace River and flooded this whole valley, and we've got this monstrous great, very cold lake, and we can see all along this new coastline, which was once, of course, halfway up the mountain, we've got these rock exposures, and these rock exposures are Upper Triassic in age. And 220 million years ago, this whole thing, this whole area was one vast sea, and it was warm, probably quite pleasant. And in those warm seas were all sorts of animals. The most interesting, from my point of view, are these wonderful reptiles, the sea dragons.
The sea dragons McGowan has come in search of are ichthyosaurs. Ichthyosaurs were once as abundant in the sea as dinosaurs were on land.
But this one gives us a nice picture of what a complete ichthyosaur looks like. You can see, starting up at the sharp end here, they've got this long, pointed snout, lots of teeth, all the better for grabbing at fishes. Very, very large eye socket here, very large eye. And they don't have legs as such, they have fins here. Well, the whole thing looks very fishy, doesn't it, really? And this is why they got the name of ichthyosaur, meaning fish lizard.
After Maastricht, more finds were reported from all over Europe as quarrymen and miners dug through rocks laid down over 200 million years ago, in the period of geologic time known as the Triassic, and the two periods that followed, the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. Here were the inhabitants of ancient oceans, mosasaurs, like the creature from Maastricht, plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, and above them, flying reptiles called pterosaurs, who had developed thin membranes across the bones of their fingers that made them capable of taking to the air. Then, in 1822, came the first dinosaur find. Tilgate Forest, Sussex, England. Gideon Mantell, a 32-year-old doctor, tells the story in his diary.
I was sent for to Mrs. Morris, who suffers much from the ague. Mrs. Mantell accompanied me. A very pleasant ride, pursuing our way through the windings of the wood. While I was attending to Mrs. Morris, my good wife descended from the chaise to take the air. Men repairing the road had left piles of rock from the nearby quarry. Mrs. Mantell, being possessed of a keen eye, for she often assists me in engraving the illustrations to my researches, was taken with something that had been exposed by the quarrymen. Having applied a plaster to Mrs. Morris, I returned to the chaise and went in search of Mrs. Mantell. I found her much excited and desirous to show what she had found.
You have discovered an animal new to science.
A pretty tale, but some fiction is mixed in with the facts. Mantell was not the only dinosaur hunter to fall in love with the romance of a time before time. But the tooth itself is no fiction. It sits in the British Museum of Natural History. Dr. David Norman.
And this is it. This is one of the teeth that Mantell found, and one of the first ones that he described. If you look at the crown surface, you can see these lovely, long, smooth ridges which run down the surface of the crown. And then on the edges of the crown, these little crenellations. This animal was not only large and a reptile, but also a plant eater. And that's an unusual thing. At the time, no giant plant-eating reptiles were known. Mantell was really encouraged by the discovery of these new teeth, and it really started him looking in earnest at the quarries in the area. He discovered a whole variety of bones. He discovered bones like this, which is from the backbone of a very large creature. He also discovered a whole variety of broken limb bones, again of something very large. Other odd bones like this, which are toe bones. And then, most puzzlingly of all, he found these long pointed bones, for all the world rather like the horn on a rhinoceros. His problem now was to really make sense of all these. What sort of an animal did all these bones belong to?
Mantell, consumed by his search, spent hours at the Royal College of Surgeons in London studying specimens. And then one day, someone showed him a stuffed iguana lizard, one of the first to be imported from the West Indies.
The teeth, when Mantell looked at them, were very similar to his mystery animal. They were leaf-shaped, and they had very roughened edges, just like the roughened edges that you can see in this specimen here. The conclusion Mantell drew, therefore, was that he had discovered a gigantic herbivorous lizard.
Mantell was still a long way from reconstructing his animal. But then, a jumble of bones was unearthed from a quarry in Maidstone, Kent. Mantell made this sketch of the remains.
A Maidstone specimen. It was discovered in 1834, and it was blasted out of a quarry. You can still see here the blast hole where the thing was actually blown to pieces. It was glued back together, more or less. So what did he do? Well, he looked at this jumble of bones. He could see, for example, over here, there's a row of vertebrae from the backbone. If you look at the center of the slab, you can see that there are these long brown bones here. These are evidently leg bones of one sort or another. And yet, up here, there's a scattering of toe bones. So you've clearly got a real jigsaw puzzle. And he was presented with this problem. How did this puzzle actually fit together?
Once again, it was a tooth that gave Mantell the clue he needed.
On the inside of this surface, you can see a series of quite broad ridges running down the surface of the tooth. And then right along this edge, there are some very, very fine ridges. And they're absolutely characteristic of an iguana lizard. By the mid-1830s, Mantell had accumulated enough evidence in the form of teeth, bones, and pieces to be able to attempt what you see here, which is the first ever reconstruction of one of these extinct giant reptiles. If you look very carefully at the diagram, there are one or two interesting features that you can see. In the backbone, there are groups of 4 vertebrae, and they're just like the ones that you can see on the mantelpiece. In addition, on the front of the head, there's this tiny conical spike.
Which to Mantell looked much like the spike on an iguana lizard.
Very interestingly, he's put the horn on the end of the nose. He then said, this is a giant extinct relative of the living iguana, and therefore he gave it a very appropriate name. He called it iguanodon, which means literally iguana tooth.
The iguanodon became Mantell's obsession to the exclusion of all else. Mary Ann Mantell took their only daughter and left him. At the end of his life, bankrupt, bereft, sick, Mantell sold his entire collection of bones to the British Museum. 20 years after Mrs. Mantell's discovery in Tilgate Forest, the fossil creatures were finally given a collective name by this man, British paleontologist Sir Richard Owen. Owen was already famous for piecing together a giant extinct bird, a moa, from just one fragment of leg bone. Then in 1841, he wrote a long and learned report.
And at the end, he put in some more speculative remarks. And among these, he claimed that certain fossil reptiles that had been discovered in the years before this time were quite unlike any living reptile, so much unlike that they deserve to have a major group named for them. And he promptly named them dinosaurs, Dinosauria in the Latin form.
Which means in its English form, terrible lizards. Here they are, as conceived by British sculptor Waterhouse Hawkins. Hawkins heard about Owen's dinosaurs while he was working on designs for the famous Crystal Palace exhibition in London that had been built to celebrate the brilliant achievements of modern man. The Great Exhibition of 1851 was the first big exhibition of its kind in the world. It was housed in a spectacular piece of architecture, an enormous building completely made of glass and steel. Inspired by Owen's vision of these terrible lizards and seizing the opportunity offered by the exhibition, Hawkins contacted Owen, and together they designed a fossil zoo based on Waterhouse Hawkins' sketches to be housed on the grounds of the Crystal Palace. In 1853, the zoo was complete enough for Owen to host a dinner party inside a half-finished iguanodon. The following year, 1854, the exhibit was opened and 40,000 people attended on the first day.
So altogether, this made a complete, very spectacular and complete age of reptiles, which seemed to have preceded the age of mammals, and which in turn had preceded the age of man.
The animals still stand there as Owen and Hawkins envisioned them. But did dinosaurs really look like this? Planted squarely on 4 feet like bovine armored tanks? The first answers came from the other side of the Atlantic. Peter Dodson is professor of paleontology at the University of Pennsylvania.
These goings-on in Britain were all very well and good, but it took discoveries here in America to really advance the science of paleontology. This is the very first American dinosaur discovery. This tooth was tantalizing rather than informative. The most exciting dinosaur discovery was the discovery of this skeleton in New Jersey, in Haddonfield, New Jersey. These bones were sent to Professor Leidy at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. Leidy was a brilliant paleontologist and anatomist. He named the skeleton Hadrosaurus. This was the first duck-billed dinosaur. In studying this skeleton, he realized that the thigh bone was very big and heavy, just what you would expect from an animal that weighed as much as an elephant. But the bones of the forelimb, the front leg, were very light, rather short, slender. This was not an animal which could have walked on all fours. It could not have supported its weight on its front legs.
And thus was born the concept of the upright, two-legged dinosaur. Quite unlike Sir Richard Owen's galumphing quadrupeds. In 1868, Hadrosaurus was mounted in Philadelphia. It was the first time a dinosaur skeleton had been mounted anywhere in the world. Joseph Leidy, using only a few scattered pieces of bone, had constructed something that did not appear in the menagerie of four-footed behemoths at the Crystal Palace. A dinosaur that went around on 2 legs. Was Sir Richard Owen's vision of dinosaurs completely outmoded by Leidy's hadrosaurs? These are drawings of a whole herd of iguanodon skeletons, 39 of them, found in a mine in Belgium in 1878. Cataloging and restoring them became the life's work of a Belgian naturalist, Louis Dollo. He was a contemplative man, a thinker, who preferred the quiet of his laboratory to the hubbub of scientific controversy. And it was here, in the Royal Institute of Natural Sciences in Brussels, that Dollo demonstrated conclusively that iguanodons, as well as hadrosaurs, walked on 2 legs. Or he thought he did.
He showed very clearly here that they've got these very long, powerful back legs, ideal for supporting a very heavy animal. Added to that, you've got a very long, powerful tail and quite short front legs compared with the back legs. Now, these are the proportions of something like a kangaroo. So not surprisingly, Louis Dollo had them reconstructed on this metal frame in a very kangaroo-like posture. Louis Dollo cleared up one other mystery as well. Do you remember that conical bone? Looked rather like a rhinoceros horn that Mantell had had so many problems with. He put it on the nose of his iguanodon. Louis Dollo proved that it wasn't at all on the nose of this creature. It was a defensive weapon, all right, but it was on the hand. It was his thumb. These reconstructions of Louis Dollo have stood here for the best part of 100 years and largely unchallenged. And it's not surprising, he was working on complete fossil skeletons. However, not even Dollo was immune to the odd mistake. If you know where to look, you can find a few yourself. Let me show you one. Back here in the tail, you can see that it has a lovely curvature. The back end of the tail rests on the ground, and it curves smoothly up to the hips for this animal, just like that of a kangaroo. However, if you look closely at the vertebrae, you can see that in a number of places, the bones are actually dislocated. Here, and here. In fact, Dollo probably broke those to make that smoothly curved tail. So if we straighten the tail like we really should, as we've seen, that brings the chest down much more close to the ground. And naturally enough, the arms are going to fall very close to the ground, and the hands can be used as they really should have been for walking upon. That would have made Iguanodon a quite adequate quadruped, and perhaps one that Owen would have actually been rather pleased about.
So has David Norman finally reconstructed Iguanodon right?
Well, we've got it right for the moment.
Meanwhile, in 1877, just before Dollo's iguanodons came to light, the American West had been the scene of a remarkable scientific showdown. High noon over dinosaur bones. Paleontologist Robert Bacher.
This is Como Bluff, Wyoming. To me, the most beautiful place in the world, because it was here at Como in 1877 the first complete dinosaur skeletons were found, and suddenly dinosaurs became famous worldwide. So illustrious were the finds here among bone diggers that the greatest minds in paleontology were willing to wage war right here.
The war was fought between Othniel Charles Marsh of Yale University and Edward Drinker Cope of Philadelphia, two wealthy scientists and lifelong rivals.
We're just across the river from Philadelphia. This was Cope's territory. He had it staked out. These pits also happen to be rich in fossils. and Cope arranged with the pit operators to receive a steady stream of fossils. Cope's problems began when Marsh asked if he could come along on a fossil collecting trip. So Cope accommodated Marsh and brought him down right into the pit. And they collected fossils, found lots and lots of things, even a few dinosaurs. They had a wonderful time. They parted good friends. They even named species after each other. But Cope didn't realize that Marsh was taking notes, and Marsh actually paid off the quarry operators. And so the steady stream of fossils that had been coming to Cope dried up.
In 1867, the new Transcontinental Railroad was pushing through a remote area of Wyoming. Two railroad men, William Carlin and William Reed, had learned about the new interest in dinosaur fossils back east and wrote to Professor Marsh in New Haven, telling him about some bones they had found while hunting antelope. What they discovered were huge heaps of leg bones and ribs. It was the most colossal pile of dinosaur remains ever found. Carlin and Reed had just kicked off a gigantic Jurassic gold rush. Marsh, using his own private fortune, financed the two railroad men to prospect for bones and send them back to him at Yale University. Back to the east went trainload after trainload of Marsh's dinosaurs, 30 cars or more, hundreds of tons.
The tons of bones coming into New Haven excited the envy of Professor Cope in Philadelphia. He sent his own men out to try to sniff around, to try to steal bones from under Marsh's nose. These men were dinosaur rustlers. For 15 glorious years, the digging went on here, from 1877 to 1892. Nothing like it has come since. And the dinosaurs that came from here not only filled museums, they filled magazine articles, encyclopedias, textbooks. They filled people's minds with the whole wonderful pantheon of Jurassic dinosaurs. Brontosaurus, Stegosaurus, Allosaurus, Morosaurus, Creosaurus, the whole glorious crew.
In the final tally, Cope identified 56 new species. But Marsh came out ahead. His total of new species was 80. Out of this fierce competition came enough fossils to form the nucleus of 3 or 4 of the world's greatest collections of dinosaur remains, including those at the Yale Peabody Museum, the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and the Smithsonian Institute in Washington.
Cope died in 1897, 2 years before his rival Marsh. But Cope issued one last challenge. In his will, Cope specified that his skull be preserved and his brain be measured, because in those days, many scientists believed that brain size was the true measure of intelligence, and Cope was confident that science would show that he was more intelligent than his hated rival. But Marsh never rose to the challenge, so we will never know the truth. However, Cope's wishes were respected, and we have his skull right here in Philadelphia.
In the days of Cope and Marsh, dinosaurs were assumed to be reptiles, huge lizards. But this picture began to change, in part because of the finds made here in Utah. 150 million years ago, this land was flat. But 60 million years ago, gigantic forces crumbled the land, tilting it on its side, and the secrets buried in the silt of that river were exposed. Curator of the Carnegie Museum, Chris Kristolka.
One of the first guys to work this area was Earl Douglas. He was sent out here by the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh in 1909 to find dinosaurs and bring them back to the museum. Douglas was a down-to-earth guy, a folksy paleontologist. He didn't want to disappoint his people back in Pittsburgh. And he spent 2 months during the summer of 1909 prospecting and scrambling over rock faces, such as this one.
And on August 17th, success. He came across huge vertebrae embedded in the rock face, part of the backbone of a giant sauropod dinosaur.
Well, finding the bones is one thing, and getting them out of the rock is quite another. Douglas had no idea that the whole project would take 15 years. One of the reasons it took 15 years is because the rock surrounding these bones is very, very hard. And Douglas had an answer to that problem. Giant powder, which in our lingo is dynamite.
Douglas had found the single richest concentration of dinosaur bones anywhere in the world, greater even than the finds in Como Bluff. Over the next 15 years, he shipped 350 tons of them back to Carnegie Museum. But here in Vernal, Utah, he kept part of his find intact, exactly where he dug them up, sheltered now from the elements by a glass and steel hangar in Dinosaur National Monument. But how did these bones get here in the first place?
Well, 150 million years ago, when this rock layer was deposited by a flowing river, dinosaur carcasses floated down the river, piled up on a sandbar, one carcass on top of another on top of another. A jumble of dinosaur carcasses on a sandbar makes for a jumble of dinosaur bones in a preserved quarry. Here's a good illustration of the jumble of dinosaur bones in this rock layer. Here we have mostly bones of Apatosaurus. Here we have part of the pelvis, thigh bones, and lower leg bones. But straddled across this Apatosaurus jumble of bones is a bone of Diplodocus, another sauropod.
Carnegie, who had financed Douglas on his trips, ordered life-size models to be made and shipped to a number of museums in Europe. But some paleontologists took exception to the upright pose. They thought its legs should be splayed out like a crocodile. After all, dinosaurs were big lizards, and they should be made to crawl like lizards, shouldn't they? Not according to the Carnegie Museum. If dinosaurs moved around like lizards, they would have to drag their bellies along the ground or sprawl in specially dug-out trenches. Either that, or stay submerged in water to offset their enormous weight. The correct stance of dinosaurs was hotly debated for the next 30 years. Until 1938, when Roland T. Byrd rode into town. The town he rode into was Glen Rose, Texas. Roland T. Byrd was a high school dropout who had gone to work for the American Museum of Natural History and would ride the back roads of the West on a Harley, searching for dinosaurs. At an Indian trading post in Glen Rose, he found a slab of rock for sale, and in it, tracks of dinosaurs. Paleontologist Jim Farlow.
This is it. This is the Paluxy River near the town of Glen Rose, Texas, and this is the place that made R.T. Byrd famous. It was here in the bed of this river that R.T. Byrd found the first sauropod footprints. People had known of the skeletal remains of sauropods for many years, but up till now, no one had ever found any sauropod footprints you could be certain about. This is the place where they got them. So R.T. really hit scientific pay dirt here.
I told the men we'd have to build a coffer dam to shut out the water. They rolled up their pant legs and started bailing. By the time the boys finished the bailing, they'd laid bare several thousand feet of track. It was the largest dinosaur track quarry ever opened. The ancient Egyptians would have marveled at how little things had changed. The threat of rain was ever with us. Once lightning hit my Buick, made a hole in the top.
There's still a lot of good tracks in this river. When the water level is low, you can see them quite clearly, but the water's fairly high today, so obviously there's not much to see here except water. However, there is a very nice sauropod trail here, and I've marked it to show you the sequence of left and right tracks made by the hindfoot of the dinosaur. So we can walk along here. There's one of them. That was one I didn't mark, but here's a right hind foot that I marked, left hind, left, right, left, and right. Now, this is a big animal. This is an animal bigger than a hippopotamus. It's not a very big sauropod, but it's a big animal by anybody's book. And yet look how close together the tracks made by the left and right-hand sides of the dinosaur are. If this animal had been walking in a sprawling lizard-like fashion, I don't think I could reach the span with my hands, but they're very close together, and that indicates that the dinosaur walked with its legs directly beneath its body in a very erect fashion. This is a chart that R.T. Byrd made of his excavation of dinosaur footprints in 1940, and it tells a really interesting story. You can see, first of all, the footprints of the sauropod dinosaur, the big plant eater. There's a hindfoot impression of the animal, and there's its associated front foot impression. We see that there's a very good left-right sequencing of these footprints along the length of the trail. Associated with this particular trackway, we also find footprints of a meat-eating dinosaur. It really looks as though the meat-eater was following the plant-eater, perhaps to invite it for lunch. In fact, Byrd thought he saw evidence that the two dinosaurs had actually struggled, at least for a moment. As we follow the meat-eater's tracks, we get good left-right sequencing of the footprints until we come to here, at which point we go from a right foot to another right foot impression. In other words, right here, there is a missing left footprint. How do you account for that missing track? What Byrd thought had happened was that the meat-eating dinosaur had actually physically caught onto the back of the dinosaur that it was chasing, and because the sauropod was so much bigger, had been literally jerked out of its tracks for a second. It made a little hop here, and the left foot didn't get a chance to touch the ground. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but it is a very dramatic story, and it's the kind of story you could only get from footprints. You wouldn't be able to get that kind of scenario from a skeleton.
If R.T. Byrd was the easy rider of dinosaur studies, its Indiana Jones was Roy Chapman Andrews. Andrews' greatest adventure started at the American Museum of Natural History in 1920. he had invited Henry Fairfield Osborn, president of the American Museum, to lunch.
Allegedly, after this pleasant lunch, Osborn puffed on his cigar and said, well, what do you have in mind? What's all this for? And Roy laid out a very, very elaborate plan, exciting plan for exploration of Central Asia.
Andrews set up a base camp in Beijing, and from there, the expedition set out for Inner Mongolia. They bought a fleet of Dodges, vehicles with spindly wheels, to go across the Gobi. And they hired about 125 camels. The camels carried the gasoline. The vehicles carried the people.
Roy Chapman Andrews assembled a power team of scientists, a wide variety of specialists, because the whole idea was to do a description of the Gobi Desert in all respects, in all dimensions, not just paleontological.
In a series of 5 separate expeditions in the 1920s, Andrews scoured the deserts of Mongolia for bones. It was rugged. Desert sandstorms would rip the tents out of the ground or the shirts off their backs. Sudden drenching rain showers turned the ground to axle-deep sludge. But the harsh majesty of the landscape lifted their spirits.
Everyone was enthusiastic over the beauty of the great flat-topped mesa on the border of the Badlands Basin. Its surface was covered with black lava, but the sides were blood red. The spot was almost paved with bones. With its sculptured ramparts, it was the richest locality of the world from a paleontological standpoint. We named it the Flaming Cliffs.
Andrews was ingenious. When he ran out of burlap, he used camel hair packing to wrap the fossils. The technique has not changed much since then, only the materials have gotten a little better. They found large deposits of dinosaur skeletons, but it was on their second trip that Andrews and his party made a discovery that would secure his place in the history of dinosaur studies. It was July 13th, 1923. They had returned to the Flaming Cliffs.
We saw a small sandstone ledge, beside which were lying 3 eggs, partly broken. The brown striated shell was so egg-like that there could be no mistake. These must be dinosaur eggs. The prospect was thrilling. No dinosaur eggs had ever been found, and we would not let ourselves think of it too seriously.
Scientists do things this way. They tend not to accept things right away because they're just afraid to say that, wow, we've made such a great discovery. And it was only after some deliberation that they decided, yep, couldn't be anything else. They have to be dinosaur eggs.
20-foot-long carnivores growing out of 10-inch-long hatchlings, 2-ton monsters laying eggs. 70 years after the first Andrews expedition, these images are in the thoughts of scientists from the American Museum of Natural History as they prepare to go out again to the Gobi Desert in 1992. They've already been there twice before, in 1990 and 1991, with their colleagues from the Mongolian Academy of Sciences. They go in search of evidence that dinosaurs are, in a sense, still with us.
Most people, when they think of expeditions, paleontological expeditions, they envision people walking over a great expanse of plain and then say, well, I bet the dinosaurs are here, and start digging a deep hole, 200 feet deep, until they hit pay dirt. Well, that's not the way it is. We look for bone weathering on the surface. We walk. And a paleontologist spends most of his time in the field walking until they find a big accumulation of bones and then start digging around or quarrying. But most of this is field reconnaissance, walking, and looking.
They never touch the specimens. When they find something, the scientists wrap the rock that encases the fossil in a plaster cast bandage.
Okay.
They end up with plaster boulders of varying sizes ready to pack up and carry away.
And it doesn't look like there's any bone on this side, so we've got the whole skull.
All the real scientific work goes on once you get the material back to your museum, to your university, to your institute, and you have a chance to work on it.
Dr. Malcolm McKenna of the American Museum will spend weeks, even months, on this meticulous work.
You spend a lot of time very delicately chipping away unwanted bits of what we call matrix on the outside of the bone. And you can simply chip away a little bit here. I'm removing actually just a tiny little bit at a time, and then it's cleaned away with some air, and we look at it, and then we go at it some more.
What is being revealed by all this grows logically out of the fact that not all dinosaurs were giants.
We think of dinosaurs generally as these massive animals, but there are some very small and delicate creatures with long necks, and some of them almost elongate jaws that remind you a bit of bird beaks, and very smooth skulls, and very long limbs with big claws. And these groups of theropod dinosaurs seem to be giving us clues to the beginnings of birds, because they look a little bit like birds.
Dinosaurs into birds? It's not an entirely new concept. In the 19th century, Sir Richard Owen and Thomas Huxley, the great British Darwinist, had the same idea. But for years, while scientists conceded that dinosaurs and birds may have had a common ancestor, most refused to believe that birds were descended directly from dinosaurs. And then in 1970, that all changed. Some scientists questioned whether pterosaurs, the small, broad-winged reptiles that had taken to the air, could do more than glide. Could they actually fly, like birds? Pterosaurs had long been an interest of Yale University's John Ostrom. One day, Ostrom went to look at a specimen of a pterosaur at the Tyler Museum in Haarlem, Holland.
And when I saw that specimen, within the first couple of seconds, I knew that it was misidentified. Basically, nobody had seen that specimen right. And I can't tell you. The adrenaline started flowing, the pulse rate went up. I was holding an unknown specimen of Archaeopteryx.
Archaeopteryx, a small-boned theropod, had been famous since a specimen was unearthed in Germany in 1860. Since then, only a handful, all incomplete, had ever been found.
These are replicas of most of the specimens of Archaeopteryx. The most famous animal, perhaps, of all. And this is the prize, the gem of all of these, the famous Berlin specimen of Archaeopteryx. It was found in 1877. Perhaps, no, not perhaps, it is, without question in my mind, the most valuable specimen of anything in the world. It's a perfect intermediate between birds and reptiles. Look at the head, look at the skull, and in the mouth, teeth. Birds don't have teeth today. It has a long reptilian-like tail. The feet, on the other hand, are very similar to what we find in most modern birds. Not all, but most. And then, most important of all, on the arms are feathers. Clear but faint impressions of feathers that were attached to the forearms. Details almost precisely like the details of modern feathers. And that raised an immediate question in my mind. If they are so much alike, perhaps birds came directly from some dinosaurian group?
Thanks to Ostrom's work, which was inspired by his discovery in Harlem, scientists are now able to trace a direct lineage connecting long-dead dinosaurs with the pelicans in our marshes, the sparrows on our lawns, the pigeons in our parks. More questions followed.
It isn't possible that these come down a bit further, is it?
If birds were descended from dinosaurs, were they related in other ways? Were dinosaurs social like birds? Were they warm-blooded? Did they migrate? Through the combination of ingenuity and luck that is characteristic of all progress in science, answers to these questions are now being assembled, and convincing ones.
Next time on The Dinosaurs.
She said, I hope this is a megafind. And it's turned out to be just that, a megafind.
If we've got live dinosaurs, we can time them like I've just timed this race.
Warm-bloodedness is a wonderful adaptation, but it carries a tremendous price. The price of eating all the time at fabulous rates.
The Dinosaurs was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the financial support of viewers like you.
As an additional service of this station, the Dinosaurs series is available from PBS Home Video. To order by credit card, call 1-800-PLAY-PBS.
This is PBS.